So, welcome to Beyond the Hype, a 1 year review of AI ethics and the new CRCC guiding questions. So, what we want to start off with is just acknowledging and kind of the disclaimers that are necessary. While this uh, the presentation has been supported from the U.S. Department of Education, the Center for Innovative Training and VR PATH. We want to note that the department does not mandate or prescribe practices, models, or other activities described or discussed in this document. It's really important to understand that these conceptualizations, thoughts, and topics are on behalf of Dr. Ticky and myself, as well as we are not speaking on behalf of CRCC in an official capacity. These are all developed concepts that we think, we hope will be helpful for you all, but were developed by us. Dr. Ticky.
Hi everybody. Good to be here. I can't believe it's 26 years of the symposium, but happy to be here. I'm a visiting assistant professor at the George Washington University, and I'm also, even though we're not speaking on an official capacity for CRCC, I'm also currently on the CRCC Ethics Committee and the newly developed AI workforce or work group as part of the commission.
And I'm Dr. Rob Froelich. I am an associate professor with the George Washington University and the former chair of the CRCC Ethics Committee. So as you can tell, we kind of like this topic and the broader spectrum of ethics
We
as
also
well.
nerd out on, I guess that's what you said, Wendy, right? Nerding out on ethics.
Yeah, so
You're good company.
we're gonna do a little of that, and we thought it would be super fun to be like in the same room today. So old school way to join the webinar. So for today, we're going to talk a little bit about what is artificial intelligence. We're going to talk a little bit about the current state of AI and professional codes of ethics. And we're going to talk about a wonderful new resource that the Commission on Rehabilitation Counselor Certification for Rehabilitation Counselor Certification has developed these guidelines for AI usage. By the end of us talking with you, it's a little less than an hour, but we hope that you will be able to analyze the evolution of AI in practice, apply the CRC guiding questions framework, implement some ethical transparency protocols, and mitigate algorithmic bias and hallucinations. So let's start off with me asking you, Dr. Ticky, really, what is artificial intelligence?
Oh, this is such a loaded question because artificial intelligence is so many things. But really, at the end of the day, it boils down to just being math. Right? And so it's a branch of computer science. It's really focused on creating systems that are capable of performing tasks. Um, and I say that and thinking about if we're looking at a funnel, right? And the big, broad opening that is the top of the funnel, that is how we conceptualize and that is how we define artificial intelligence. And then there are more focused components that kind of fall into what these different types of technologies and what these different tools can do. But really, at the core, artificial intelligence is a series and a series being billions of different linear regressions looking at predictions. When we talk about or when you hear about these large data centers that are being developed, that's really what they're doing is they're housing stored information and it's being used to train these different types of models. And so the information is coming in, and then the different tools, right, as we kind of look at that funnel, we think about that funnel, we get more specific. And so with any kind of information, we think garbage in, garbage out, right? And so if the information that's being fed in is garbage, the prediction is then likely to also be garbage, right? And so one of the big things that when we're talking about using artificial intelligence as a tool for a myriad of different things is maintaining that content expert lens, right? How do I maintain my level of expertise and my knowledge and safeguard that, right? So keep that in mind as we're kind of talking about these different topics and going through, the CRCC guiding documentation, because that's really going to be paramount as to how we're thinking about incorporating and using AI as a tool. Really, AI is more about what the system does and not necessarily how it learns. And so when we get into some more of these different aspects, that's when we start talking about how things learn or how these different platforms and tools are being programmed to learn. And I use learn in quotations. Um, so machine learning is kind of that next component when we think about that funnel, right? We're starting to filter out and becoming a little bit more specific in how we're understanding artificial intelligence. Um, and so machine learning is really a way of describing how systems are programmed and how they detect different types of patterns. And so commonly when we think about machine learning, the most common one that is used is supervised learning, where it's using information to learn, right? So think about, your email. Your spam filter is a form of machine learning, a supervised machine learning, where you have the option to say whether or not something is spam or it is spam, right? And so by providing that kind of feedback, it is then learning how to detect certain patterns of words to determine whether or not this is spam, right? It could be looking at the email addresses that it's coming from or the content of the email to determine whether or not it's spam or not. The other forms of learning are a little bit more nuanced, where unsupervised learning is really based on pattern detection and kind of starting with a blank slate. And as you're feeding information into a model, it then detects different patterns or similarities and kind of learns essentially on the fly. Um, and then reinforcement learning is much like, when we're thinking about learning psychology, positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, it's very similar to that, where you're providing additional input into what information is being fed. And so it's really about that pattern recognition and understanding those patterns. And then finally, we get into the most sophisticated format of artificial intelligence, which is considered deep learning. And this is the very specific, very tip of the funnel. Um, Deep learning is, again, a form of artificial intelligence, a specific component of machine learning. This is what powers your large language models, which your large language models are things like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, Perplexity, right? There are a lot of different large language models. And the thing is that these require large data sets, right? When we think about having to do billions of linear regressions, right? You have to have a lot of data in order to make any kind of prediction based on that. Um, but a lot of times you'll hear this term of a black box surrounding some of these platforms because they are considered to be less interpretable. And that's because of the many layers that kind of go into the development of some of these machine learning type tools. Um, and so when we think about what might be happening on the back end, a lot of it is related to coding, but a lot of it is also kind of that pattern recognition and kind of what happens moving forward. Um, as part of the CRCC guiding document, all of these definitions are also defined, and was used as a way of helping to create a level of uniformity when we're thinking about artificial intelligence. And we say that because a lot of times misinformation can be, there's a lot of places to get information. And so we wanted to create a level of uniformity when it comes to understanding what is artificial intelligence and what are these different types of tools. Um, But some other tools or other techniques and forms of AI are also discussed on that document. Generative AI, it's really just a tool or a resource that creates new content, right? And so generative AI can be across multiple different platforms, right? You can use a large language model to generate new content, right? You can use it to generate images or new text or videos. And so those platforms have built-in components of generative AI. Natural language processing enables computers to be able to interpret and generate human language. Think about utilizing text to speech or speech to text, right? That's a form of artificial intelligence where it is interpreting spoken language to written language or vice versa. And then, the most commonly known form of artificial intelligence has become large language models, which are your ChatGPTs, Claudes, Geminis, and those are trained on massive data sets and that are used to summarize, translate, and converse. Right? A lot of information has come out about people having conversations with their language model of choice. Um, and then finally, a form of AI is called agentic AI. This is kind of starting to go away a little bit. It's not as popular and as dominant as some of the other forms of AI. Um, but it's a way of automation, and again requires some more layers that are currently being explored and discussed. Um, Personally, I don't know a whole lot more about agentic AI. It's not an area that I really have focused in on. But we wanted to make sure that that term was kind of thrown out there. Um, so,
So let's talk a little bit about this broader conceptualization of AI and how does it relate to our field of counseling,
mm,
right? So let's just start real simply with some images on the screen. And these are some pictures of some advances
mm,
that some of us, if you're, well, not since the 1440s, but that we're aware of,
that's a good found
that we're over
there.
that we're over time, right? So the printing press kind of changed the way many things in the world, but the typewriter changed the way that information was shared. The word processor kind of moved beyond there, and then laptop computers. But if you also think of, the old-timey first phones where people were like so surprised that they even worked, or then moving further along, the I love the big old cordless phones, all the way to the iPhones that we have now, or their competitors. All these things probably generated some feelings, some strong feelings, maybe euphoria, maybe excitement, maybe fear, maybe anxiety, right? So uh, the rapidity, the speed with which technology is advancing is a little shocking for us right now when you look at these time frames. But we're in another advancement, sort of like the Industrial Revolution. And that was scary. We're moving from the horse-drawn carriage to those newfangled cars. I don't want to minimize any of this, but if you're feeling a little anxious or a little worried, that's okay. But we're going to talk about some things to do to
Mhm.
maybe address that.
Mhm. And then so we have here just a very brief timeline, right? As we're thinking about how technology itself has emerged, we're now thinking about counseling and AI. Um, Really, AI is not a new terminology. AI has been around since the 1950s, and in the field of counseling, showed up first as ELIZA in 1966. And then it kind of moved into different types of tools and, early chatbots showed up in the early 2010s, maybe even a little bit earlier. Um, I can remember, I'm not going to say a year, but using AOL Instant Messenger and thinking that it was really cool to be having conversations with somebody that actually wasn't there. Now that I think about it, it's probably a little scary. But so some of these things, while they weren't branded as AI, met some of the criteria or kind of had some of the components that are specific or that we're seeing. Um, in AI. In 2020s is when we really see the boom, especially in the field of counseling, where, there's a chat GPT for therapists, AI notes for therapists, these different platforms that are popping up, these different tools that are helping with note taking, dictation, right? And we're seeing this shift in how some of these models are being developed, that it's really kind of exponentially being integrated into the field of counseling, where we're essentially having to play catch up, trying to catch up, like really play catch up to figure out, okay, how are these tools being implemented? How are we using them? How are they developed? Right? So that we can ensure that we're providing the best care and support to the clients that we work with. Um, in addition to kind of that notion of counseling, we're also seeing, like, in terms of playing catch up, we're seeing it now in the literature. Right? A lot of these tools really boomed COVID-19 era. And so now we're starting to see kind of the implications and how this is showing up in the counseling research. Um, a lot of the research coming out now is related to how counseling professionals can use AI as a supported training tool. There are a lot of different platforms, and methods that not only counselors but counselor educators are using to help support different types of skills that are being utilized. And so one particular study kind of looked at students using ChatGPT as a way of engaging in therapy, but also as a way of receiving feedback. And so there was one particular group in this study where the participants would engage in a 30-minute text-based counseling session with the chat GPT. And then at the end of that session, it would generate feedback of what worked well, what could be improved, and there was, some mixed information about kind of how students were receiving and perceiving the information that was provided, where a lot of students reported an increased level of anxiety when it came to engaging in counseling, not only in a text-based session, but also then receiving feedback from somebody that was not actually their client. And so we're seeing a lot of the literature now where it's figuring out what are these different types of tools and what implications do they have in counselor education. Some of the other pieces of literature look at diagnostic predictions using machine learning and using different tools as a way of predicting diagnoses for an individual. As counselors, we know that, mental health is not something that it's yes, no, right? It's very subjective. And so it's really important to understand the implications that this can have for the field in thinking about how, as a professional, do I maintain that level of expertise? I think I was talking with a colleague once about kind of the diagnostic predictions using machine learning, and we referenced the movie Minority Report, where if something is telling me that I'm likely to be depressed based on, this criteria, am I more likely to then go be depressed? Because I'm, enacting my future, kind of like a learned helplessness kind of a thing. Or am I actively going to try to change that trajectory? And it really could go either way, but we kind of equated that to real life Minority Report. Um, which was really interesting. And then there's several articles that use predictions related to risk of suicide. And so the AI viewed the rating as too low. The counselors in the study kind of overestimated suicidality. And so really the question is who and what is right? And as counselors, we kind of know that a lot of things in counseling are highly subjective, right? We emphasize person-centered planning and meeting people where they are. And so when things are based on math, right, we're predicting human behavior based on math. Um, it really comes into question of how do we maintain our level of professionalism? How do we maintain that level of content expertise, even though we might have tools that are giving us additional information or suggestions?
And there are some tools that can be very beneficial and congruent and add to our abilities and our time for actually seeing clients more, right? A lot of the clinical documentation tools that are available do some things that would be really helpful. Now, we're going to talk about confidentiality in just a minute too, because it's not like, hey, just because these tools are available, we should use them in all settings with all people
Mm,
without the consideration of informed consent or without the consideration of where does this information go. We're merely kind of suggesting that people become more aware
mm,
of what is out there
mhm,
in order to be the ultimate decision makers over what to use and what not to use and when, right? There are counseling specific tools that are looking at administrative burden, a lot of AI note taking, so speech to text and large language models to structure session summaries. There are things that go from, if you're in a closed system, something like a therapy notes, that can literally, with client permission, say, I'm using this tool as it helps me generate notes post session, and then to be more effective with that information. You got to decide, is it right? Ultimately your clients have to decide, is it okay with them for this to be there? So the benefit would be to reduce administrative burden and to allow for greater client interaction or to free up time to do more creative functions or planning or whatever. Um, there are in between tools too, not just that listening thing, but using AI to be able to uh, uh, enter in some manual summaries of the session and then develop something like a SOAP note or a DAP note or what have you.
mhm,
We're not saying ethically open the gates and use them all the time for all situations, but we're at a point where it's really important. I can't remember which podcast this was on, but I heard a really, for me, meaningful statement, and it
mm,
was, don't be afraid that AI is going to take your job or all jobs, or right. Don't lean into that fear that all the labor market is going away. Do lean into the fear that someone who knows how to use AI for your job is going to be at a really much bigger advantage than you, right? So it's
mhm,
not like, hey, we're all going AI, but it's like, how do I both understand what's available
mm,
and make good choices about what's available? So as you all are intimately aware, the CRCC Code of Professional Ethics is the one most related to what the vast majority of the 200, 300 plus people who are on the webinar today do, right? This is the code of ethics that makes the most sense. But when it
mm,
comes to thinking about um, technology, technology is well represented. It appears in the most recent 2023 code 35 times. One time related to presentations under professional responsibility, two times under testing and assessment, two times under supervision and teaching, and a whole bunch of times in Section K, which relates to technology. If you're interested, Dr. Ticky and I wrote an article summarizing the updates to the 2023 code and technology, but there's no mention of AI at all because when we were redrafting the code in 21 into 22-ish,
Mhm.
um, it really wasn't what it is right now. Be aware the revisions to the code are going to be started again in January
Yeah,
2027, somewhere
January
around
27th.
there. So
Mhm.
I can pretty much guarantee you AI is going to hit the next edition. So stay tuned for that.
And so with that, we then introduce the recently released frequently asked questions and guiding statements that was developed by the Ethics and AI Work Group, which is a subcommittee part of the Ethics Committee. And so this AI task force just consists of current members of the CRCC Ethics Committee, and it was really started in an effort to provide some kind of response to the drastic increase in AI related discussions. ACA had come up with some recommendations. Other professional organizations were starting to come up with recommendations. So it was suggested CRCC should also come up with some kind of recommendations. And as a task group, we decided that the best place to start was to create just a resource, right? Something that provides information and support to professionals who are looking to dip their toes into AI and looking to understand how AI blends or meshes or works well with the current role that you might have as a VR counselor or a CRC. Um, and so really we wanted this to just be a broad scale document that really emphasizes the importance of ethical decision making. And so the document itself really starts by talking about what is AI, and gives different definitions for the different terms that are associated with AI, talking about machine learning, agentic, generative AI, right? All of the things that we kind of talked about earlier in the presentation. But then it goes into asking specific questions that are relevant to counselors who are working with clients, right? How do I ensure confidentiality? How do I use AI with my clients? How do I understand the limitations of AI? Um, we also place emphasis on the utilization of skills, and incorporate some information related to ethical decision making. Um, all in all, this guidance is really just that. It is guidance. It is a first step, a first draft of figuring out how do we as professionals work to integrate and understand how AI assists in the work that we do. Um, we're still uncovering the vast capacity that AI can have. And so again, I say this as this is just a draft and this is just a place to start. Um, and it largely aimed to address different sections of the code and used the code as kind of a foundation for things that are considered enforceable. So things like confidentiality and being able to talk about competence and having competence and professional well-being and a professional responsibility. Right. So we used a lot of those sections of the code to serve as the foundation for this guiding document.
In the very beginning piece is looking at confidentiality, right? So anonymity is the key, right? If you can't anonymize whatever data you're about to enter, don't enter it into any kind of public AI. Don't put it in something like Chat GPT, because it's going to become part of the model, and it's breaking confidentiality. It's all of this. I like the way that you just said that, Dr. Ticky, of the enforceable standards are still the enforceable standards. Here's how we
Yeah.
kind of view it through that lens, right? So the gold standard is really only using HIPAA compliant systems with assigned business associate agreement, right? So that's those closed systems, right? So that's something that within your practice or within your state agency that closes the doors to everything outside and only uses internally. At GW, we have a new, it's Gemini,
Gemini.
right?
Mhm.
Gemini that does not reach out beyond the GW community for building the model, but just stays within. Similarly, in different practices and states and what have you. Make sure that you understand, though, is what you're using a closed system that
Mhm.
actually has a business associate agreement. Also, make sure to remove any kind of protected health information and personally identifiable information if you're using anything that
Mhm.
deals with AI. And also assume any data entered into a public-facing AI is immediately compromised,
Yeah.
right? You've already broken confidentiality. So,
Mhm.
so do realize all of those things as they pertain to confidentiality, but also data. Many of you work in large agencies with entire data units and all sorts of policies and procedures and regulations, and they're there for a reason,
Mhm.
right? So make sure that you're adhering all of the data security measures, making sure that things are encrypted with strict access controls, ensuring client data is not used to train public models. Really, maybe even, well, that's important. All of it's important.
All of it's
But a
important.
really big important one, I want to underscore this one is
Yeah.
informed consent.
Mhm.
Be transparent about AI usage with clients.
Mhm.
Explain how data is protected. If you are going to use something and they give permission to do so, make sure that you can talk about how it's a closed system and how that differs from just general AI.
Mhm.
Right? And clients should always have the right to decline AI usage without any kind of penalty. It's a right to opt out.
Mhm. And one of the things that we've been seeing increasingly is the number of clients who are coming to different practices, whether it's, private mental health practices, whether it's, coming in for VR services. The clients themselves are using these different AI tools. And so it can be really, it can be really beneficial. And if we're thinking about working in state VR, using counseling and guidance as a service to be able to explore AI tools with clients and doing something like that together. Um, that way, you're also ensuring that, your client is also using it safely and they're not entering personally identifiable information and that they know how to use the tools. We'll talk in a little bit about something called AI literacy. It's very much like financial literacy and technology literacy, but specific to AI. There's definitely some of these platforms have a learning curve to them. And so it's how do I use them effectively and safely? But some of the tools that are being generated using job market analysis, being able to summarize trends and skills and get salary data, right? That information is based on data, right? So being able to use something like ChatGPT to explore, what are the salary trends for a given position in this area, given these parameters, right? It's likely to give you a pretty solid output pulling from different pieces of information, right? But then you as a counselor, if you're using AI to do something like a job market analysis, having the conversation with your client, what do these different data points mean? How are they directly related to the work that you are doing with your client, right? So being able to incorporate it in that sense. Document drafting. This one is really becoming increasingly common. Being able to create initial resumes or cover letters that are de-identified, right? Make sure that if you're putting in or creating a template, that your client's name's not on there, their address, their email address, phone numbers are not on there. But it's really looking at, okay, these are the positions. Can I get a summary of potential responsibilities? Or can I get, based on these previous job experiences, can I get an idea of what this person's skills might be, or any transferable skills that might be worth noting? Based on kind of a, rough template, generate a cover letter template, right? With the caveat of making sure that the information is de-identified, right? Not including locations. I might even leave out specific companies, really depending upon, the individual. And that kind of leads into the next piece about skill and credential matching, right? Based on, some of these skills that the client has identified that they have, what is likely to be, good fits for the individual. I will say with that, there's the added caveat of, again, you are the expert, right? You know the individual, you know their needs, you know their interests, their skills, abilities, right? Everything that a VR counselor knows. An AI is not going to know all of that information. And so making sure that while using some of these tools to help identify some of these potential paths or some of these different skills or exploring these different topics, that you're still maintaining your professional level of expertise. Because at the end of the day, you know more about the field than an AI does. And that's really kind of leading into that golden rule, using AI collaboratively, but also making sure that your organization, your state agency, wherever you might be working, gives you permission to do so. We're not freely saying go out and do all of the AI things, use all the AI tools. Check with your organization first, because they might have specific guidelines and restrictions as to how and what platforms can be used. So I might even encourage folks that that might be the first step, is figuring out, okay, what capacity do I have to be able to utilize AI? I mentioned this briefly, related to AI literacy. AI literacy is really just about understanding how to use AI and understanding what it can do. So the first image we have is this a blueberry muffin or is this a chihuahua? And so it's important to know, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, but AI makes mistakes where blueberry muffins and chihuahuas can show up as the same thing. Um, and so I guess this image is really to highlight that AI can make mistakes and kind of remembering that it doesn't know everything and that anything that AI generates is not considered factual, it's a prediction. The other piece is really about what's called prompt engineering, and it's generating prompts that give a specific response, right? If I'm entering in, please generate this job market analysis, for example. As the content expert and the VR counselor, I have an idea of what I want it to generate for me, right? So I can critically analyze whether or not the information is correct based on the prompts that I provide. Here we have an image of somebody entering into an AI. Is this mushroom edible? The AI responds, yes. The next image is an individual laying in a hospital bed, and the AI responding, you're right. It's a poisonous mushroom. Would you like to learn more about poisonous mushrooms? The point here, I love this image so much, but the point is here, yes, technically the mushroom is edible. Should you eat this mushroom? No, because it's poisonous, right? And so that's kind of the difference in understanding prompt engineering and being able to practice that as a way of developing AI literacy in order to really start to tease out the specifics that you're trying to get out of using these different tools.
So developing AI literacy is a huge portion about the frequently asked questions, and there's a big emphasis there, right? So for clients, being able to teach clients that AI is a pattern matcher, not an expert, right? And not a human being, and encourage them to challenge AI suggestions against their lived experience. If something sounds wrong, maybe it is. For counselors, treat literacy as just like counselor professional development. Understand basic mechanisms, master prompt engineering, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second, for better, less biased results, and know what you want as an output based on the information from the input. And again, stay current with the HIPAA and Business Associate Agreement compliance. So I'm going to take it back a step, okay? So it's not going to be uh, surprising to you that Dr. Ticky and I, if it were a continuum of AI usage and expertise, we'd be on opposite ends of the spectrum. But I think it's a really like if there are folks out there who are listening right now who are on the earlier end of the spectrum and they're a little fearful of this, let's use some examples that kind of demystify it a little bit. All right, so we provide at the Center for Rehabilitation Counseling Research and Education lots of technical assistance and training. And a lot of it is based on policies, and a lot of it is based on lengthy documents, right? AI can really do a nice job of breaking that down into useful chunks of information that you can use. But um, uh, you have to make sure. My wonderful colleague Carol Panko, I bet, is on here, and she just shared a great example with me last week. She's like, "Okay, I used AI, and it kind of generated all of this great stuff, but in the middle there was this garbage that had nothing to do with what I put in there." And she even went so far as to say to the platform that she was using, "What is that garbage in the middle?" And it kind of was like, "Hee, you caught me, you got me," right? So there's like really a piece of that, but I'm going to demystify it even further. Like, let's take it even out of that realm. We're not talking about client stuff. We're not even talking about technical assistance. AI is kind of everywhere right now, right? So there's a particular platform that I like to use that streams music. Spotify, I'm not getting paid to advertise them, but that's the one, right? So in the recent past, they've had like an AI DJ button, right? Right. So it's like, here's the AI DJ. But it really just pulls from whatever your playlists are, the things that you most frequently use. So I was like, oh, that's not that interesting. I use it a lot for running, right? So um, my musical, I'm going to be vulnerable here. My musical choices are really diverse from there's days where I want to hear Taylor Swift, Lady Gaga, Beyonce. There's days where I want to go into disco because it's got a really good kind of beat and I was a child of the 70s, right? There are like 80s hair band days, and I know that's really ironic. Um, but there's other days where it's like Benson Boone or Harry's like so it's a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't fit together. Country music, because I lived in the South for a long time, all sorts of stuff that really doesn't seem to fit together, right? So there's a new level on AI that does this prompt engineering, right? So it's like, I want to hear something that I've never listened to before, that is similar to my listening styles, that people 10 years younger than me listen to. Because at this age, like you're like, oh, 10 years younger. I like that prompt. So I used all of the way, I went into this thing and I'm running, and all I'm getting is this like twangy, my dog died, my girl left, my pickup truck died. And I'm like, this is bringing me down. Do you know what I didn't put in the prompt was make sure that the beats per minute are right. Otherwise, you get this sort of thing that you're not looking for. So I want to encourage people start playing around with this in innocuous, like who cares about a playlist? Like that's not really a big deal.
Yeah.
Some sort of innocuous way where you can become more comfortable with prompting those. I did put the document, the CRCC document, into several platforms. Gemini came up with some really useful slides that we actually used in here in terms of content. Claude, who I feel like if Claude was a person, I'd probably be more aligned with Claude. We'd probably be friends. Um, I put too many prompts in and it kept doing like the spiral, right? So again, I'm being vulnerable here. Yeah, I'm not far along on this. I'm learning. So other folks out there, maybe you want to learn along with me in ways that are not harmful in
Yeah.
terms of confidentiality or anything like that.
Being able to and that's like you said, that's a great way to practice prompt engineering, right? There are a lot of different platforms. I can say that I recently used ChatGPT to help identify different plants that were in my front yard, right? There are different ways to be able to become familiar with these different tools without utilizing, client information.
So we have a few more slides, right? And then we've got some other organization suggestions because we didn't want to be so bold as to just say, hey, here's what CRCC is doing. I don't think we're going to get to them because we have 5 minutes left, but the last three slides we're definitely going to be able to get to, right?
Okay.
So it's really crucial to understand the limitations of AI, right? Algorithmic biases reflect societal biases regarding race, gender, disability, and all sorts of things. It's the stuff that we do not want included in counselor education. It's the stuff that we do not want making decisions about services relative to providing counseling services. AI will, it's called hallucinate. AI will generate confidently fake stuff, false stuff, like I was just making mention before, little just stuff in there. If you use it to generate a reference list, like a whole high percentage is going to be stuff that never existed. It's not
Yeah.
real, right? AI is going to have a lack of empathy, right? It can't understand the complex systemic barriers faced by individuals with disabilities. Many chatbots are going to offer the illusion of demonstrating empathy or compassion, but math really doesn't have feelings, right? And it really is math at the end of the day. And this one I kind of like too. Sycophancy. I don't know if I said that the right way, but I tried. I tried.
I can't
AI
say
may
anything.
try to please the user by reinforcing existing biases rather than offering clinical challenges. It's just going to say what you want it to say,
Mhm.
right? So, with all of this information, how do you safeguard ethical decision making? You want to make sure that there's always a human in the loop, right? The counselor is responsible for human oversight, maintains final authority and accountability, right? Think of AI as suggestions, not directives, right? Treat AI outputs as data points to be critically evaluated,
Mhm.
right? And make sure you use an ethical decision-making model as well, like identify the problem, collaborate with the client, develop and review solutions, implement, evaluate, and reflect, and always speak with supervisors or colleagues to strengthen your decision defensibility. Super important things.
And then, as kind of going off that decision-making model, these are some additional guiding questions and some takeaway thoughts that we want, folks to think about of, when you're considering to use AI or when you're wanting to not use it AI. And so I think we start off this section, is this tool equitable and culturally responsive? Right? You just mentioned that AI can have some biases to it, right? And so, depending upon the model that you're using and the data that's being used to train that model, it might be you're not getting what you need or you're not getting what you want in order to address the clientele or the individuals that you're supporting, right? So who is represented and who might be missing from the data that is being used to train that system. And I think this is again, I think, right, opinion of N of one, that tools that are developed within those closed systems have better capacity for being, equitable and culturally responsive because those closed loop systems are being trained by people who are likely to have that in the forefront of their mind as they're training these different tools. Um, Another good question to ask is, does it respect privacy and autonomy? Right? We talked about some different agreements that are required, HIPAA compliance, right? Do these platforms have that in place? Understanding how data is being collected, stored, and shared, if it is at all. Right. So being able to ask some of these questions to figure out whether or not this tool is going to be appropriate, not only for your needs, but is it also going to meet those enforceable standards that are part of our code of ethics? Um, who created it and how are decisions made. And this largely happens on kind of the back end of how are decisions made, but it's really what is being used to train the tools that are being implemented, right? What considerations kind of were put into place as we're thinking about how this tool was developed. Um, can I explain how this tool arrives as at recommendations? One of the cool things about certain platforms is you can ask it for a report of how it made the decision. What resources, what information were utilized in order to come to the conclusion that it came to, right? So being able to, use that as a form of prompt engineering to ensure that you're supporting your clients. And I see John just popped up, so that means we're out of time.
So
Don't yell at me, John.
So there's just a couple of some bonus slides at the end that look at beyond CRCC, look at the American Counseling Association, NBCC, the American Association of State Counseling Boards
Mhm.
or board, right? And then there are some state counseling board information in there too. So beyond now, when you're thinking, I've got a few minutes, I want to look at some additional information. Now you have it. So, and I think we're a minute over. Biggest apologies.
No,
Um,
you're
Real quickly, excuse me, John, for interrupting. We did have one question. Are you aware of any state VR agencies that are currently using AI either to determine eligibility or in other types of ways?
I wish I could use my phone a friend option because I know some of my technical assistants colleagues mentioned that there may be 3 or 4 states that are at various levels of development on how to apply AI within their system in an ethical manner.
Mhm.
Um,
The
uh,
tool Sarah Works pops around quite a few times in terms of an AI related tool that some state agencies are using. Which states those are, I'm not 100% sure.
And if whoever that is that had the question specifically wants to email one of us, we
Okay.
will put them in contact with our colleagues who
Mhm.
probably have better fund of knowledge about that question.
and
Okay.
then
And I know,
also the
okay.
VR TAC is also partnering with an AI company to look at developing a tool to be piloted that would help with eligibility determination, to help take case notes, etc. So I would definitely keep an eye out at vrtac.org as those developments happen across the road. There was also another question, and Maureen, I don't know if you're going to talk about it, but
Go for it, John.
can AI be programmed to have a database of the code of ethics to gain knowledge from, and then for counselors to refer to as a quick reference, maybe for certain situations that arise, and how to apply the code of ethics? Um, so, kind of an interesting thought about how AI and our code of ethics may be integrated to help with counselor practices.
I,
It,
I don't know how to answer that. I'm not a computer programmer.
it'd be super swell if the models could
Yeah,
learn from the code of ethics.
right.
I I love that concept.
Yeah, same. I just
Well,
don't know
and
how.
there was lots of chat about how folks were using it for either taking notes and
Okay.
acknowledging sometimes AI is not always accurate. And I think your examples were really good about, boy, we've got to go back in there and check this because I know we're all busy and oftentimes AI could provide a nice summary, but it still doesn't stop us from going in and having to check to make sure they're really accurate. One of the things we do in communities of practice too, we'll ask AI often to do a summary, but we go in and actually make sure it's correct. And we also take out information that was not meant to maybe be included in notes, etc., that AI
Mhm.
picked up. So we want to make sure. And oftentimes we don't allow chatbots in our Zoom rooms because again, we don't have a control over
Yeah.
who's going to share that information, especially in a space that's supposed to be safe for our community of practice participants. So,
Yeah.
um,
So John, it's not all good, it's not all bad, it's somewhere in between. But imagine, using the tool, right? And so I get to the end of my playlist and I'm like, Spotify, you don't know me. And I'm not even asking for it for mental health or rehabilitation counseling services. Imagine what it would feel like with mistakes in that realm.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
it's a
So it's not all
wonderful
good, not all
tool.
bad.
It's a
Exactly. It's a
tool.
wonderful tool, but we, like any tool, we have to use it as skilled professionals, right? And take into consider many other things on
Mhm,
the use of that tool. But
mhm.
Proceed with caution.
Yeah.
exactly. And more to follow, right? As this field continues and also as the code of ethics are updated to continue to provide our guidance. Drs. Ticky and Dr. Froelich, so appreciate this presentation.